manager, Marty Brown. What's good, Marty?
I'm good, man. What's going on with you, Mill?
I'm chilling. It's hot as shit out here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm all right.
Welcome to Philly.
All right, so what are you currently working on?
Well, I got a fighter who I'm in negotiations with signing right now in the state of Pennsylvania, obviously. So I can't really speak on the legalities of that, but that's what I'm working on. You know, basically, signing, these up-and-coming guys, just basically providing them with resources and services that will protect the fighter and make sure that they benefit as much as possible in this brutal sport inside and outside the ring.
As a manager, what do you look for? Like when you, a guy's coming out the amateurs, do you look for talent? Do you look for marketability, a combination of both? What?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I look for a combination of both, and because I'm a USA Boxing official, I'm able to have the inside scoop, so to speak, on who these fighters are and following them and tracking them in the amateur program. And so those are the two things I look for: talent, number one, and also marketability. But the first thing I really look for is the dedication. Just because a person is an amateur doesn't necessarily mean that they have the desire or the dedication to want to become a pro. So once we ascertain that they do want to become a pro, then we go on looking at talent and marketability, because both are totally, totally important in this sport.
All right, I'm about to ask you a question.
All right.
Which is more important, the talent or the marketability in today's current climate?
In today's current climate, I'm going to say marketability, because your talent, it can actually help you in the sport of boxing, and it also can actually hurt you in the sport of boxing. And I mean help you in the sense of, obviously, people want to see talented, professional fighters. They want to see competitive fights. That's what the fans want to see. But sometimes when you're too competitive, when you're too good, when you're too talented, that may alert some other fighters to say, I got to duck this fighter. I don't want to fight this fighter, or not right now. Hence is what what Boots is going through right now. And in my personal opinion, he is probably the most talented, if not one of the most talented fighters in the division. But because of the marketability aspect in this climate, a lot of people would say, well, I would love to, compete with somebody like Boots Ennis, but at the same time, he hasn't been on a wider landscape like some of these other fighters like Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford as far as marketability. So some might call it an excuse, and they'll say, well, he's not there on that level yet marketability wise, so I don't want to lose money to be able to compete with this guy. So he has the talent and Boots has the marketability, but some other people may have different, assessments on that.
It's a common theme with Boots and fighters like Boots.
Yes,
you often hear high risk, low reward.
Yeah.
So explain, like, you're in the back room.
Oh, yeah.
You're one of the guys who makes decisions on if a fighter's going to fight a guy or not fight a guy.
Absolutely.
What goes into making that decision?
Well, high risk, low reward is very simple. And this is not just in the business of boxing. It's in the business, generally speaking. I mean, if you go in there and you're competing with a person who is very talented, and the risk of you losing is more, I guess, obvious than you making money, then you have to weigh the scale. So as a manager, my job is to make sure that if it is a high risk, it has to be a high reward as well. Because we don't want to go in, choose to fight a guy or a female, and there's high risk, but you're only getting a little bit of reward. To me, that doesn't make business sense. So what we want to do is make sure that even if we win or lose, we're still marketable enough when we get out the ring. I'll give you a classic example about that. And this is not a knock on Adrian Broner, but let's use Broner as an example. To me, Broner is a talented fighter. Most fans would agree with that. But most fans will also agree that, he doesn't have the potential that it looked like he had back in the earlier weights when he first, became a professional. Because at this point, he doesn't let his hands fly, so to speak. His punch output is not as, I guess, compared to other fighters, is not as workable, right? So, but the great thing about Broner in his case is because he's marketable, it don't matter who he's fighting. He's going to get a high reward, regardless of the risk. So when you start making those comparisons, somebody like that's talented as Boots and who has that great potential and who is marketable, and then you look at somebody like Adrian Broner, where it doesn't matter who he fights, his name is connected to his marketability, then you start, weighing your options, so to speak. Did I answer your question, Neil?
Yes.
All right, awesome.
All right. let's expound on that for a second.
Okay.
Right? Should the fighter get blamed for fights not happening? Because often it's like, oh, Earl is ducking Bud, or Bud is ducking Earl. Like, does it fighter deserve blame? Is it the management? Is it promotion? What?
Well, that's a very good question. Most fighters, I'm gonna be honest with you, keeping it all the way 100. 90% of fighters, they want to fight in the ring. They want to compete. 90%. You have some other 10% that is like, I really don't want to fight this person. But 90% of these fighters, they do want to fight. The bottom line is the fighters cannot fight without management approval, without promotional approval. Because at the end of the day, it's still a business. You know, the sport of boxing is still a business. And so you have, I always tell people this, there's a difference between the sport of boxing and then you have the business of boxing. And so in the sport of boxing, 90% of the fighters, they do want to compete. But in the business of boxing, just because, you know, this is the fight that all the fans want to see right now, sometimes it's better to let the fight brew a little bit. I mean, look at when Leonard fought Hearns the first time. You know, God rest his soul, Angelo Dundee. He was in an interview and he said he's the one that delayed the fight between Hearns against Leonard, because he understood that once you build the fight up, it's very easier and marketable to promote the fight, and then more money can be generated as far as revenue is concerned.
Do managers decline fights before fighters even know about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you an example. If I'm managing a fighter, let's say he's 8-0 with 4 knockouts as a manager. Yeah. And I receive a phone call from another manager or another promoter. And he says, Marty, look, I got a fighter. He's 15-0 with 15 knockouts. And your fighter is 8-0 with 4 knockouts. Depending on the situation, most likely, I would decline it. Why is that? Not because my fighter don't want to fight the other guy, or the fighter, my fighter isn't competitive, but because I understand the business of boxing. If I have at this point, if he's 8-0 with 4 knockouts, that means that I am grooming him to be a prospect, right? So that he can be in the position as someone who's 15-0 with the 15 knockouts, right? So if my prospect loses, it's bad for business. You know what I mean? Not saying I can't market him again, but it's bad for business, and that's not a fight that, I mean, right now, that I would agree to, because if this guy is 15-0 with 15 knockouts, obviously he's ready to fight on TV. Yeah. He's ready to fight for a regional title, possibly fight for a world title. You know what I mean? Depending on who his promoter is.
He's basically about to be in the conversation.
He's basically in the conversation. You know, so you have prospects, then you have contenders, you have opponents, and then you have champions. There's only 4 types of fighters in this game. So in my case, my fighter is a prospect. They will obviously market him to be an opponent fighting another undefeated guy who has more experience than him and more background or more amateur pedigree. It's just not good business.